Hi everyone, thank you for coming. So I'm going to make a start, jump right in. Throughout this presentation, you'll be instructed and know what's coming. It's going to be a presentation about, obviously, chirology. You're going to understand how it works, what it is, the breakdown of understanding the hand, and then everything that goes along with that. So, what is chirology? Well, chirology is the study of the size, the shape and the weight of the hand, the finger lengths and the fingerprints, and the lines. Now, what a chirologist does is analyze all of these things to then interpret someone's psychological, someone's character, and someone's health to some degree. Now, I've been studying chirology for 10 years, and in doing so, you see all sorts of absolutely fascinating things. And what I've got here is a breakdown of those different areas that we're going to look at. So, why the hands? The hands are obviously a very, very unique and personal thing. So everybody's hands are incredibly different. So aside from being very, very expressive, being very, very personal and very individual, what the hands have actually got are these different layers of analysis which you can then break down and look at. So obviously you've got this postural body language element that everyone can interpret with the hands, and anybody that doesn't know much about any kind of analysis would be able to infer things just from the way people hold their hands and things like this. You've also got all the genetic attributes that come through looking at the hands. So this would be in certain shapes and certain line formations and things like this. You've got hormonal variants. This is seen in the finger lengths. This is something else we analyse. You've got all these different connections to the brain. So the hands are more connected to the brain than any organ. It's very, very interesting, all these different links. And then you've got the connections to the nervous system as well, which is primarily seen in the lines of the hand. So, modern hand reading. So this is different to palmistry. Palmistry traditionally is much more to do with fortune telling, predicting things that are going to happen, and assessing things on one little characteristic. What a chirologist does is they look at everything in total, and nothing is done in an individual mark, something like this. So, modern hand reading developed in the 1850s. This is when people started to look at the hands in relation to people's character and their jobs and things like this, and started to realise that different shapes would have correlations with different professions. This has basically continued. So in the 1940s, you've got chirologists and psychologists and psychiatrists looking more at the hands in relation to personality, getting deeper and deeper in things like this. In the 1950s, you had people that look at the hand in relation to mental health, a lot of psychiatrists looking at the hand and things like this. Moving on into the 80s, we've got hand researchers who are doing much, much more in-depth studies, developing this kind of empirical basis within chirologists to understand what's going on with the hands. And then into this century, you've actually got a lot more sort of scientific papers coming out that give different areas of this a lot more validation. Specifically with the fingerprints is an area that's really, really being looked at in relation and things like that. There's a lot of slides that I'm going to show, so I'm going to get through this part. I'm going to start looking at some hands very soon. Briefly mention some of the science behind this. The digit ratio is 1. That's quite a lot. It might be something that some of you have heard about. So the digit ratio is basically to do with the finger lengths, and what this explains is that there's prenatal testosterone and estrogen that will affect this length, and then from this you can then assess things like people's sporting ability, people's language development, people's ability with communication, people's ability with reading and writing, and visual spatial awareness and things like this, all based on these finger lengths. So of course when I'm doing a reading, I'm looking quite a lot at people's finger lengths. The brain's motor cortex is more connected to the hand than any other area. So about a third, about 35% of the brain's motor cortex goes directly to the hands. So what this means then is just further more connections of the brain to the hands, and there's a huge amount of brain activity is expressed in the hands. Palmar lines and brain activity. So this is very interesting. So the lines on the hand are a reflection of mental activity, not physical activity. So that's a really, really key thing. It's a very common misconception. People with the most lines on the hands have got the most active minds. The lines on the hands also change. They change quite dramatically. I'll give you some examples in a little bit. So when you see a hand like this, what you can see is somebody that's got an overworked nervous system. You can see that there's an awful lot of lines on the hand. And when it's like this, it shows that the person's going to be more in a fight or flight mode. There's going to be more sympathetic dominance of the nervous system. And there's going to be a lot more mental activity. Now, of course, when I'm doing a hand reading, I see somebody's hand like this, there's an awful lot I can discuss in relation to this, the best kind of ways they can utilize it, because it can be a very, very positive thing in the right kind of area. But then, of course, if they're getting too stressed, that's going to just exacerbate it. The other misconception is that the lines just increase as you get older. So everybody can see that. It's a little bit blurry, actually, isn't it? Let me just see if I can quickly... Okay, there we go. That's a little bit better, a bit sharper. Okay, so what we've got here is, on the left, a 65-year-old lady, and then we've got an 18-year-old lady on the right-hand side, and sort of projector depending, you can see all these different lines comparatively on the hand on the right. So what we can see is that the girl on the right is going to have a far more active nervous system. She's going to have a much, much more busy mind. She's going to be much, much more highly strung. And also she's going to be a lot more active. She's going to have a lot more high energy. And then this would be very important that she kind of cathartically exercises it. And conversely, this hand is very, very clear, the one of the elder lady. Line development, the lines on the hand change. So because the lines are representative of brain activity and they are developed in relation to the nervous system, they do change. So what we've got here is an example on the left. If we can see that, we've got the yellow around how there's not much of a line there at all. However, if we look up there, that line's got a lot stronger a couple of years later. So this is a hand of a chap who's I took a couple of years apart. You can't quite see these on projected too clearly, but you can see that there's two little lines here that are quite strong. There, he hasn't got those anymore. And then big line there where the red is, which he didn't have previously. So yeah, the lines change as people's lives and people's situations change. I'm just going to adjust this ever so slightly. So here's another example of lines changing. So we've got 2016, this is the lady's handprint on the left, and then 2018 on the right. This is the close-up. You can see there's an awful lot more lines on 2018 print, and this is showing a lot more kind of stress, a bit more anxieties, and a lot more pressure that the person's feeling. It's coming from the home and the family area, it'll be relating to work and things like this. So you can see things changing quite rapidly within the hands. So that's a bit blurry. Let me just adjust this a bit. Okay, let's try that. So this is what we're going to look at in the presentation. I'm going to take you through how to read a hand sort of step by step, breakdown by breakdown. And what it is that you end up doing is developing this layered image and conception of someone's personality, of their character, which you can really only get when you look at all of these things individually. So we're going to look at the hand shape, skin texture, finger lengths, fingerprints, major lines and minor lines. It's going to be a whistle-stop tour. There's quite a lot to get through, but it is very interesting. So why have a chirology reading? So people come to me for all sorts of reasons, but what you can do through analysing someone's hand is gain a very, very quick, objective picture of someone's personality, their character, which you can then feed back to them. And it can be really, really reassuring for anybody in whatever situation to hear something that they know quite deeply about themselves expressed to them from somebody who doesn't know them at all. So this could be really, really useful. For example, in a self-development purpose. Now, we've looked at some of those more full hands. So if somebody like that came to me and said, I can't relax, I need to learn how to relax, it's going to be very, very specific, my advice for that person, dependent on their situation, by looking at their hand. Careers is another example that people would come and speak to me a lot about. So, for example, we're going to find out what water hands are later. If someone comes to me with a water hand, my career advice is going to be completely different if they've got a very, very excitable, passionate fire hand. Because fire hand and water hands, they need completely different things. A fire hand is going to get a lot of satisfaction from a huge amount of stimulation. A water hand essentially likes working with people in a creative sort of way. So that would be something that I would be able to ascertain pretty quickly. And of course, it can be very, very reassuring. If somebody was just sort of teetering on the edge, thinking, oh, maybe I should do this, maybe I shouldn't, that can be really, really helpful for them just to reaffirm something they already know. Relationships is another area in which it's very, very interesting to look at. You can really understand how relationships match. You can understand how different characteristics intermingle, how different traits will contrast and contribute to each other, and also where there are challenges. And in understanding your partner's hands, you can really understand best what they need, how to work best with them, and where people just have to understand each other slightly differently. And I'll give some examples of this as we go through. And yes, individual couples and families. It's great looking at families' hands, looking at parents and children, because again, it's the same principle. Parents can understand their children in a way in which they haven't understood before. They can understand why different siblings have got slightly different personalities, slightly different behaviour. And always what I'm looking to do is optimise whatever traits we can see in the hand. So it's not just about purely looking at these things. It's always going to be about how can we utilise this? How can we get the most out of what this person's got? How can we bring the most satisfaction to what this person has? And yes, it's an objective. So it's not me analysing the person's personality after trying to sort of read them and interpret what they're saying and everything like this. About 80% of my readings I do without seeing the person because I work a lot online. So it's not about looking at the person. You're just looking at this, which is a very nice medium. And the analysis is instant. So a lot of the time people come to me and they say, right, is this good or bad? Okay, I'll say something and be like, okay, is this good, is this bad? And the answer is nothing's really good or bad, black and white. It's always about how you use it. So my example here that I'm going to show you, this is a fingerprint pattern called a composite print. It looks like a yin-yang pattern. Lots of you will have this. It's not good or bad, but it's how you use it. So, for example, the negative things with a composite is that they can find it very, very hard to make decisions. They can find it very, very difficult to make up their mind, and they don't like committing, and they always like to have their eggs sort of separated, not in one basket. However, the positive, very, very good arbitrators, very fair, very balanced view, very able to sort of play devil's advocate and take two sides of any argument. So it's about understanding this. And when I talk to somebody with a composite, there are loads of little useful things that you can say to them that will just help guide them, which will help them to overcome some of the limitations and just absolutely maximise all the positive traits that come with having a composite print. Okay, so reading hands. Hand elements and constitutional character. So what I'm going to show you here is the basic elements and shapes of the hand. So these are like the baseline things. This is how you'll categorize everything. This is the first thing I'm looking for in a hand reading. To tell the truth, people that never read a pure clear-cut elements. They're always going to be a little bit of a mixture of something else, but we're going to go through these. So these are the different shapes. We can see that an earth hand, actually the projector's making it a little bit pinched, and we have to be quite precise with these things. So an earth hand is a square palm with shorter fingers. An air hand also has a square palm but has longer fingers, so we can see the difference in the top two. The fire hand has a more narrow palm, shorter fingers, and then the water hand has a more soft, round palm with longer fingers proportionately. So we're going to go through these now. Okay, so an earth hand. Earth hands are the most physical, manual, hands-on type. They like to be stable, they like to be grounded. Earth hands feel really, really good when they're in a routine. If somebody's got an earth hand, they're always looking to try and build on their stability. Earth hands like to feel stable, they like to feel grounded, and they're very good at making other people feel very stable and grounded. So if someone's in a wobbly situation, they tend to fall back on an earth hand. An earth hand is very, very good at being a solid provider and a good rock for anyone. Now, of course, with being a solid provider and being very sturdy, they are often very, very stubborn. They can be very blunt. They don't like wasting time. They don't like wasting money. And they like to do everything that's practical. So an earth hand is always looking for a result. Careers, which we'll see an earth hand go into, they're very often doing work that's manual. They're very, very capable with their hands. They're very, very good at manipulating things. They tend to have incredibly good willpower. Builders, farmers, craftsmen, and businessmen, people with good determination that want to see practical results in what they do. Air hands, moving on. So it's the same square hand, but they've got much longer fingers. Now, an earth hand is going to be much more physical in the hand. I've got air hands, so they're much lighter than an earth hand. They're a little bit more sort of bony. They're kind of more delicate than an earth hand, but the fingers are very, very long. This is the key characteristic, and it's a square palm. So the square palm is going to give this same logic and pragmatism. However, they're going to be more in the mind, because as the fingers go longer, it kind of elevates people a little bit from the physical and puts them more in the mental. So air hands are dominated by thinking, by logic, by analysis. And they always, always work within professions which require this. They're the most technical hands, and they're forever thinking. They can be always overthinking. And that would be the weakness. So, of course, again, you know, if I'm seeing an air hand, I'm going to check and make sure that they're not overthinking. They've got something that's stimulating their mind. Things are relatively in order because they're going to be more prone to a little bit of stress, and they must have mental stimulation. Careers I've got here, programmers, psychotherapists, researchers, academics, basically anything technical you would look for in air hands. Fire hands. Now, what you can see here is that this hand has got a lot more lines. It's kind of like these etched in lines that are quite dramatic. So this is really indicative of a fiery type quality. A fire hand person is restless. They need adventure. They need constant excitement. They need a lot of challenge in terms of their short-term goals. They need a lot of stimulation. So a fire hand is going to get a little bored by a long-winded task that's a bit too technical and gets a bit too much detail. They're very, very good at motivating people. They're very good at kickstarting any project. They're very good in sales. They're very good at drawing people to them, because they have kind of got this X factor in the way in which they present things. So yeah, strengths, they're going to be dynamic, they're going to be intense, often quite muscular, they're going to be very goal-oriented, and these are things that they need. Their weaknesses is that they are going to be more competitive, but of course that could be positive if you put it in a business sense. They can be very restless, easily frustrated, and they can burn out. That's a key thing for a fire hand, so that's something I want to establish. Have they got ways of winding down? Careers, yeah, they love working in business, they're very often sportsmen, they make great managers and things, very good in PR, anything to do with networking, and anything that's about getting a project up and off the ground, they're fantastic with. And lastly, water hands. I'm not quite sure if you can quite get the image because of the projector, but you can see that the lines are a lot more delicate on this hand. They're a lot finer, and the hand itself is a lot more delicate and more kind of curved. The fingers are a lot more slender and long. Water hands are by far the most emotional and creative types. The narrow palm makes somebody very receptive to the environment. So a water hand, in whatever environment they go in, they're very, very good at sensing it. They're very sensitive to people. They're very sensitive to moods and environments. And a water hand tends to go with the flow quite a lot because they always want to bring equilibrium to whatever environment they're in. The long fingers mean that it's going to distance them again from the physical, so they're going to be more in the mind. But they're not going to be in the mind quite in the same technical way that an air hand is. They're going to be in the mind in an emotional kind of way. A water hand is fantastic at analysing relationships, at analysing emotions, at thinking about dreams, at analysing purposes. Go watch a film, you know, they're going to be sucked into the characters, and this is what we're going to want to talk about. So, obviously, they're fantastic career-wise, working with people. They make great counsellors, great therapists, great healers, and they love to work creatively. They love to work as artists, as jewellery makers, and things like this. Strengths are obviously all within those domains. The weaknesses, of course, they're over-emotional, and they struggle more in competitive environments. So that's obviously something that a water hand would have to try and work on. So those are the basic elements. So everybody's going to be a mixture, a combination of those with some elements sort of predominant over others. You've got your earth, air, fire, and water. So that's the base. That's the first part. The next thing you look at when you're looking at the hand, so you've assessed the elements, then you want to look at the skin. Now this is really, really interesting because, yeah, look, we've still got this blur, haven't we? I think what we get is we get it a bit blurry on the top and sharper on the bottom, or vice versa. So what we're looking at when we're looking at the skin texture is we're actually counting and feeling the number of ridges that somebody has. So it's nothing to do with how much physical work you do that actually changes your skin texture. It's actually like the fingerprint pattern itself. So it's the dermatoglyphic fingerprint pattern that goes all over your hand. So you've got a continuum, and you can call it coarse skin, grainy skin, paper skin, and then silk skin, which is the most sensitive type. So here we can see somebody with grainy skin, and what this is somebody whose skin ridges you can actually see. So it's quite pronounced and quite clear. So when you're looking at the bottom part of his hand here, you can actually see those individual skin ridges. So that's not often the case. When people have got this, what it relates to is the nervous system. And I'm going to show you why in the next slide. But this person here is going to have to be active. They're going to need a lot of stimulation. They're going to have to be sporty. They love doing manual work, and they're very good with building things with their hands with this skin texture. This, contrary, is a silk skin type hand. The skin ridges are incredibly soft, and you can't really see them with the eye. So if I just the last slide, you can see the skin ridges here really clearly. So when you run your finger over this person's hand, you can feel these bubbles. When you run your finger over this person's hand, there's nothing there. It's like running over like smooth silk. So this here is much, much more sensitive because this is what it relates to. It relates to the nervous system. This person is going to be very, very sensitive, very intuitive. They're going to feel atmospheres rather than feeling the physical and the solid. They're going to be much more sensitive to smells, to loud noises. This is found on like Reiki healers and mediums and things like this. People who live in this kind of other world of sensitivity that other people just can't really perceive. People that are able to pick up on an atmosphere, you know, of a room, something that is just not very tangible to other people. And yeah, the nervous system can actually be 3.5 times more receptive. And this is to pain as well. So you do not find silk-skinned people with tattoos. This doesn't happen. They can't put up the pain. And this is why, you see. So each skin ridge has got all these different nerve endings. So when you've got lots and lots of ridges, you've got much, much more nerve endings. So it's just a complete indication of that. You can probably compare with people next to you and see who's got softer skin. So then what you do, because we're always looking to layer things up and we're always looking to build a deeper, more complex picture of someone's personality, is you add the elements with the skin type. So I've got the example here of grainy skin. So if you've got an earth hand with grainy skin, you've got somebody that might want to be a farmer, for example. They want to be physical. If you've got a fire hand, you might have an adventurer, because they're going to need that action and stimulation in that sense. If you've got a water hand, well, they're going to be artistic and sensitive, but in a physical way. So therefore, you might have a sculptor, someone who works with clay or something like this. And on an air hand, you want somebody who works with the mind, but in a physical way. So you might have a geologist or perhaps an archaeologist or something like this. These are just examples. Okay, we're whizzing through, but we've got a lot to get through. So we've got the fingers here. Now each finger represents something different, and I'll spend a lot of time looking at people's fingers when I'm doing an analysis. So the index finger relates to self. This is how we perceive ourselves. It's our relationship to ourselves. It relates to self-confidence. It relates to responsibility and control. So people with larger index fingers are going to have a heightened sense of these things. People with smaller index fingers are going to have a slightly more reduced sense of these things. The middle finger So structures and rules. People with a shorter middle finger are going to be more rebellious when it comes to rules, regulations, authority, anything to do with hierarchies. They're going to have more of a resistance to. People with a larger middle finger are going to be much more diligent, much more thorough in what they do. A lot of academics will have a very long middle finger. Policemen always have long middle fingers. Lawyers very often have long middle fingers. I'm yet to see a policeman with a short middle finger. Because they have to follow the rules, you see. The third finger relates to drama, creativity, performance. It's your expression, it's your show. So people with a dominant third finger, generally speaking, are going to be more dramatic. They're going to like to have some kind of performance. They're going to have a creative eye. They're going to have an eye for design, style, fashion, taste in music, things like this. Having a larger little finger relates to communication. It also relates to insight, perception, heightened awareness. So people with a larger little finger can really have quite a sharp, astute way of noticing information. They can be very interested in literature because it's a form of a bigger form of communication, and very often they're good at public speaking. It's found on teachers, it's found on writers, and things like this. And the thumb relates to willpower. So all of these things are very interesting because in whatever hand they are, if you add one of these fingers as being dominant, it greatly influences what's going on. So if someone's got a dominant index finger, they're going to have a much stronger sense of self. Their sense of pride is going to be higher. They're going to put a lot more pressure on themselves. They're going to have a higher sense of wanting to achieve. Make very good managers. They make very good leaders. But their real challenge is actually taking that pressure off themselves because they've got this really big perception of themselves. No matter what attributes people have and what qualities they have on their hands, the thumb can really mediate all of these things. Because if someone doesn't have a strong thumb, they haven't really got the willpower to drive anything forward. The stronger the thumb, the more ability someone has to grapple with life, to change it, to manipulate and change what they want. So I'd spend a lot of time looking at the thumb as well. So these are the different types. And you're all going to have a mixture of all of these. It takes a bit of getting used to be able to identify these. You kind of need to have a knack and know exactly what you're looking for. So ulnar loops are the most common. I think I've got some details about these. Yeah, ulnar loops are the most common. About 70% of prints are ulnar loops. You've got whorl fingerprints, which individualize and intensify each digit that it's on. So if you've got a whorl on your ring finger, then it's going to intensify and magnify those qualities. You've got simple arches, which tend to add a more practical, stable, reliable quality to somebody's character. We've got the composite, which we've already discussed is slightly being in two minds, again, depending on where it's found and how many. We've got the radial loop, which makes people hypersensitive and very receptive. And the tented arch, which is quite a rare fingerprint, probably less than 1%, and it's about drama and taking risks. So I'm not going to go into too much detail there because fingerprints can get very complicated, and of course everybody's fingerprints are very individual, and you know there's more or less an infinite combination that you can have. But just to give you a quick idea, the fingerprints are fixed personality traits. So these are one of the only things on the hands that don't change. Well, your fingerprints are obviously what you're born with, and yeah, my son, who's I think at about 6 months, we could see his fingerprints. And it's fascinating to see how well defined some sort of character is going to be. So anyway, we've discussed the composite print already, and it's to do with being in two minds often. It's about being very fair, but finding things hard to choose. When somebody has a composite then, say, on the middle finger, which relates to rules, structures, religion, authority, politics, literally very often in two minds to do with these things, and very often fascinated with these areas. People with composites on the middle finger is quite rare. Very often they'd have done a lot of traveling. They'd be very interested in going to Asia, studying Buddhist culture, and kind of immersing themselves in these different things to try and answer these questions to something that they've actually got quite deep. So this is a really specific and interesting thing that you can have. A whorl on the index finger, as I said, a whorl individualizes and intensifies the finger that it's on. So if it's on the ring finger, you're going to have an individual, intense, creative, artistic ability. So this is found on photographers, fashion designers, artists, graphic designers. All of these types of people would have whorls on either 1 or 2 index fingers. Haven't got it, doesn't mean you're not artistic, but very often these people are driven by this. Sorry, ring finger, yeah, ring finger. And then, of course, if you've got the whorl on the middle finger, well, then you've got a different summation to. You've got an individual sense of rules, structure, religion, politics, and everything to do with kind of bureaucracy and hierarchy. So therefore, these people can be incredibly specific and have a lot of very, very original views with things to do with these. So we've got John Lennon's fingerprints here, courtesy of the CIA, I believe. And what we can see with him, you have to take my word for it, is that he's got a radial loop, but he's got a lot of whorls. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 whorls. So that's quite a lot. And so the whorl's going to individualize and intensify his overall character, but specifically he's got it on both of his middle fingers, which is all to do with structure, society, authority, religion, all those things, and then both of his creative fingers. So he's going to have an individual perception of his creativity and expression of it. So just a quick example. So that's the whorl there, and it's those kind of very clear circles that you get going around the print. Okay, so major lines. Everybody's probably heard of these quite a lot. What you've got is the lifeline, which is the one that a lot of people will come to me and be worried about. That's the one that runs around the ball of the thumb. You've got the emotion line, which is the most distal line on the hand. So this is the one that runs just underneath the fingers. You've got the headline, which is the proximal transverse crease, which runs along the hand that way. And we've got the fate line that runs up the center of the hand. This is to do with our direction and purpose. So I can hear lots of sort of worried murmurs. Don't worry. Well, everything will be reassured. And what generally happens is that people will have a deficiency relative to their lines in one place more than another. So very, very often someone will have a very well-developed headline, they might have a fantastic emotion line, but their lifeline is not quite as strong. Or they have a very strong lifeline, but maybe their headline's a little bit weak. And it's very, very rare that you see somebody with a very overall balanced line formation. And of course, what I would do when I'm looking at someone's hand in a reading is look at ways they can slightly adjust their life, their hobbies, or whatever, to build on their weaknesses. So therefore, they're going to feel more equilibrium and more balance sort of throughout their life in all different areas. And that's the lifeline there going up. That's your headline. That's the emotion line. Now there's the fate line. So let's start with the lifeline. So the lifeline shows how grounded, how rooted, how stable, how secure somebody is. This is what we're looking at when we're measuring the lifeline. We're looking at quality, we're looking at length, we're looking at breaks, we're looking at lines cutting through it. So it's the overall image of the hand. The lifeline does relate to health to some degree, but it does not relate to the length of life. Big, big misconception. I'll show you some examples of this. Yeah, good question. So the hand in which you write with is generally considered to be the outer world representation of yourself. So this is who you present, if you're right-handed, when you're in a public place, when you're at work, when you're with acquaintances, and when you're out and about. Your left hand is your private self. This is a side that you're going to experience a little bit more by yourself. It's a side that your partner's going to know. It's a side that your close family and friends are going to know and experience. There can very often be quite big differences, and it's much more common for there to be differences than there are a complete mirror image. And absolutely with the fingerprints as well, lots of differences. Okay, can everybody see the difference in quality between these two lifelines? So we all know where the lifeline is. It's the one that runs around the ball of the thumb. So on the right, we've got a strong, clear, well-formed lifeline. This person's going to be full of vitality, full of energy, feel like they've got an extra battery. They're going to be very resilient physically, have a huge amount of endurance, and be very, very strong, have a good routine, and be grounded. This person, on the other hand, has got a very weak lifeline compared. So this person's going to feel a little bit more fragile, a bit more delicate. They're going to have to take better care of their health because they're not going to feel like they've got this huge amount of energy all the time. They're going to be more sensitive to disturbances in their sleep and digestion and things like this. So here's the marking here, and that's the very strong lifeline there. So you've got poorer vitality, a little bit floaty, and of course not grounded. So if I saw this person here, I'm going to be speaking about ways in which to be more grounded. I'm going to ask about their routine. This person would undoubtedly, in their current state, be having a lot of late nights. They're probably skipping meals. They might be having shift work or something. And it's going to be all about working a little bit more with the physical, because the physical for this person has been neglected, which is what we can see. Okay, some more variations of the lifeline, because there are so many different variations. I'm just going to pick up on a few of the interesting ones. We've got a fork on the bottom of the lifeline here. So can we see that fork? Yeah, perfect. And then I think over here we've got a big branching out lifeline. Can you see it's kind of not curving round, it's going right out. So these are quite similar in their attributes. They're just different extremes. Forks always add variation to the line. So when you've got a fork on the lifeline like this, people can very often feel a little bit restless and they want to experience things that are a little bit different, a bit foreign. Very often they want to travel. And it's important for them to have enough time traveling, seeing different places and having enough adventure, because otherwise they just end up moving home quite a lot. So it can be quite literally wanting to have two bases in some kind of way. But more often than not, it's about needing versatility within their stability, which basically means having a bit of an adventure and going traveling. The other hand shows a really branching out lifeline. So it's branching out right into the radial side, the ulnar side of the hand, which is all to do with the outer world. So when you see the lifeline moving right down into the outside of the hand, that is somebody with a huge amount of exploratory energy. They always want to adventure. They always want excitement. This is the hand of a Marine. And very often I'll see this on people that join the army for the reason that they want adventure. So it'd be very hard for this person to stay put. They'd find it harder to just stay in the village that they grew up in, for example. The lifeline is the line in which you can time things most accurately. Now, this is a really interesting area of chirology because you can time things very accurately on the hand. So this is a rough representation of how the timing works. You kind of start here at age 5, 0, and then move round to up here, right down the bottom, which would be like 85, 90 or something like this. And when you get little markings and breaks and overlaps and things in the line, you can time it chronologically and actually be remarkably accurate with things like this. So the example I've got on the right-hand side is of an overlap or a break in the lifeline, which is one of the things that people can think, blimey, is this really, really serious? I've got a break in my lifeline. But what it actually shows is a psychological shift in someone's perception of their root and of their base. So very often when there's a break in the lifeline, somebody can detach themselves from their roots. Somebody can detach themselves from their original home, from their base. And they can actually do so physically. So sometimes, and quite often, they'll actually go ahead and move abroad during this period. Now, they don't necessarily have to go ahead and change countries and start a new base. But what would absolutely be happening is that there would be a psychological change in their relationship to their original home, to their base. And one that's much more adventurous, because it's moving that way into the hand, remember. If it was moving in, it would be a different story. Okay, moving on to the headline. So the headline is the second line underneath the emotion line. So it starts here, underneath the index finger and between the thumb, and then travels out across the hand that way. Huge amounts of variations in headlines, of course. So what the headline shows is how we process information, how we think, how we perceive the world. It's kind of like your mental computer. It's your processing power. The way you think, your thought processes, and your information assimilation. Okay, so the first thing I want to look at is the angle of the headline. Because what we'll have in this room is a lot of people with very straight headlines, which we can see here, on the left-hand side, and we'll have a lot of people with slightly dipping headlines, which is what we can see here. So we can see that that headline's curving right down a little bit more. So straight headline people are much more logical. They're much more practical with the way they see things. They're much more objective in their viewpoint. Careers and vocations that people tend to go for with straight headlines would be like accountants, systems analysts, mathematicians, graphic designers, anybody that's working in a kind of technical, mental analysis way that requires a lot of logic. They can very often be very good at maths and statistics and these sorts of things. Now, of course, we have to weigh up other things on the hand as well. You would never just look at the headline and say, well, this person's going to make a great accountant, because there's going to be so many other things that we'd look at. But it's the way of thinking, it's the way of processing. It gives somebody an objective viewpoint. Somebody with a straight headline is much more able to assess information on a kind of worldly perspective and make a judgment based on those things. A curved headline is much more subjective in someone's perspectives. The bottom of the hand here relates more to the subconscious. So when the headline is curving into the subconscious, somebody ends up thinking more with their subconscious. They end up thinking much more creatively, much more from their gut, and have much more of an intuition in the way in which they think. So, I mean, very often it's found on artists, writers, filmmakers, psychoanalysts, poets, musicians, and things like this. If, however, it's found on a businessman's hand, you might think, well, a businessman needs to be logical. But when you see it on a businessman's hand, what you realise is that they make an awful lot of their decisions intuitively, and they go with their instinct on things. So it just depends on of course, the hand and where you find it. Now, I hope that's clear enough, but can you all see it's marked as number 2? That's a dipping headline there. And if we actually go around, and I'll show you, the actual termination of the headline here is really, really dipping. It's kind of going all the way down. So that's quite an extreme dip. If you follow that line down, it would literally go all the way down. People with a dipping headline, because they've got this access to the subconscious, they do have more variance in their mood. A dipping headline can have that kind of typical artist persona of having a little bit of mood swings, being a bit in their own world, finding it hard to kind of see things clearly, and just finding things a little bit murky. So they are a little bit more prone to depression. And this is absolutely something that I would assess and discuss and work out and find out that they've got ways in order to manage it, which can really, really easily be done if they've got a creative outlet or something like this. So that's the headline here. And this is a handprint of Robin Williams, and of course did suffer from depression. So we're just giving examples of how these things translate. Headline length. Now this is really important, of course, headline. So the longer the headline, the deeper somebody's thought process, the longer their mental processing is going to be. People with really, really long headlines, they need complex subjects to really get into. They're forever thinking, and it's very compulsive. So here we've got the shorter headline. It's a shame you can't really see it properly. Yeah, I mean, I guess you kind of can. And then you've got the longer headline that actually goes all the way across the hand there. It's called a Sydney line. People with a shorter headline, they're much more in the moment. They're more focused on money. They're much more practical. And they're very much aware of what's going on now. People with a longer headline are going to be much more deep in thought. They're going to need subjects to be much more complicated. And in this case, when it cuts all the way across the hand, which is quite rare, they can be quite mentally fixed and very rigid in their own thinking process. And basically think that they're more logical than anybody else, so why should they listen to anyone else? Okay, so we've obviously seen a few variations in lines. We've seen some kind of weaker lines and things. So if we're looking at this headline here, we can see that the quality of it is very fine. It's very crisp. There's no lines breaking through it. There are no gaps. It's got a fork at the end, which relates to versatility, giving an ability to think in 2 different ways. And what's an interesting component is that it's set on the lifeline. So maybe 5 to sort of 1 in 8 people, it varies quite a lot, will have a separated head and lifeline, but it's not massively common, and it's more common in sort of different areas of the world, I mean. So what this does is it gives a separation from someone's upbringing. It means that they're able to think separately, think differently, and they haven't been conditioned. It shows a real freedom in thought. So this is a fantastic headline. And this is Einstein's hand. So yeah, we can see that the headline of this hand is really quite exceptional, as it should be, because he's a smart bloke. And then above it, he's got this floating headline. So I'll mark it in here and then there. So when people have two headlines, they've literally got two personalities. This is quite extreme. Very often people will have like a smaller adjunct, which doesn't mean something quite so significant. So with Michael Jackson's hand here, what it can be known as is a super performing headline, because it's quite elevated. So what this would be is somebody who would have one personality that's seen all the time. So this, in Michael Jackson's case, would be like the kind of shyer, the kind of more quiet, more introverted persona, and then this massive elevated personality that comes out when he's on stage or performing or something. And the two would not be reconcilable if you didn't realise it was the same person. So that's very often found on people that are very drawn to performance. Singers, obviously, musicians, poets very often will have this. The real challenge for somebody like this is finding a sense of tranquility and peace between the two. They can get very addicted to being in the elevated state and very often use drugs or alcohol or some other means to kind of get to it. So of course creativity is a very nice way to get in touch with that and writing and things, but failing that, people would very often just go to a rave, which isn't sustainable. Okay, so this is a really interesting combination here. So this is a simian line. Now, can you see that this is a really strange, weird line that people have got that cuts right across the hand in this kind of manner? And it's actually incredibly useful marking, if used correctly. So what you have is a fusion of the head and the heart line that come together to make one. So what you've got is an incredibly ruthless, driven, focused personality. Anybody with a simian line, if they want something, they're absolutely going to get it. I've got absolutely hilarious stories of clients with simian lines, and you just would not believe the kind of things that they end up doing. So what you can have is simian lines, which are found on less than 1% of people, actually rising to the top very quickly of any given profession. CEOs have got a massively disproportionate number of simian lines, and politicians. So that's Hillary Clinton there with her simian line as well. But that's Tony Blair with a simian line, of course. Hillary Clinton's got a simian line there. It's not quite as dominant as Tony Blair's. And then Mr. Farage has got one there as well. So what it does is it makes somebody incredibly driven, incredibly ruthless. They can be very cutthroat. They're not going to listen to what else is going on. And they're basically going to have this massive intensity and drive to just go forward and get whatever they want. So key thing for a simian line is, of course, to know what they want. They must have a target. If they don't, they're completely lost. And they've got this burning intensity. So that must be channeled in some kind of way. And I'd very often discuss sort of relaxation and ways in which to wind down as well. Heart line, emotion line. This is the one that's right at the top of the hand. This shows our emotional expression. It shows the way we connect to other people. It shows the way we express ourselves. It shows how in touch we are with our feelings and how we express our feelings. How we connect to people, emotional resonance, and how we feel. Okay, so lots and lots of different emotion lines, as you can imagine. On the right-hand side, we've got a curved emotion line that's curving right up. And this one here, we've got a straight emotion line. So these are the two kind of major distinctions that you can get. A curved emotion line that goes up and out of the hand is somebody who's going to be much more expressive, much more on show, much more passionate, much more Italian about how they express things. They're much more Mediterranean in the way in which they express themselves. They're very quick to get emotional. They're very quick to anger, but then of course they're very quick to make up as well. Straighter emotion lines are much more reserved. Those are your Scandinavians and your Brits. They keep things much more beneath the surface. They don't show what's going on so much. They can still be equally as deeper feelers, but they're not so quickly in touch. So if an emotional event, for example, so both of these hands have got are within a relationship. If hands both broke up from their partner, they'd have a completely different way of dealing with it, with processing it. The curved emotion line would be in floods of tears. would be absolutely angry. They'd be bawling their eyes out. They'd be talking to all their friends. They're going to be absolutely distraught for about a week. And then perhaps they're going to see this really, nice looking chap and then fall back in love with him, love at first sight, and then be on their new relationship very, very quickly and have that complete release, but then also that emotional resurgence that can come. This person here is much more likely to be wooed by romance because they themselves are more open and affectionate. So therefore, if somebody comes up, buys them flowers, writes them a poem, they're going to think, oh yeah, that's great, I'd have more of that. A straight emotion line, on the other hand, are much, much more practical with their expression of emotions. Therefore, they prefer somebody to be practical. This is with a relationship as well. Much more common for them to be drawn to their friends, to make friends first, and then 6 months later realise, okay, well, let's take things a bit further. Equally, because it takes them further to build up a relationship, it takes them longer to get over a relationship. What's very important for a straight emotion line is that they have ways in which they can actively get in touch with their emotions and express them and kind of exercise anything that might be a little bit left underneath. Of course, in a working environment, this person can fly off the handle much more easily, this person here, because of course if you say something rude to them, it's going to be like fireworks straight away. This person here tends to hold more grudges and will kind of be much more professional, but then again, they must go home and express it in some kind of way. Okay, so just a couple of nuanced variations here. So we've actually got an incredibly long emotion line here. This goes all the way across the hand, so massively long. And then on the other hand here, we've got this very short, sort of stubby emotion line that sort of dips into the headline a little bit. So it's very, very short. So these two people are going to have completely different representations when you meet them. The person with the long emotion line is going to be your best friend in a minute. They're going to be incredibly connecting with you. It's going to be hugs goodbye and everything. They're going to be incredibly feeling, and they're going to be compulsive with their emotions. They're going to be always giving, always wanting to help out, and always wanting to be around people. Someone with a very short emotion line is like a hermit. They can't handle too much time around other people. They need to have their own time. They need to have their own space. And the connections that they make tend to be much, much, much more rarer, but incredibly deep when they do finally make them. So this person would have, one or two people in their life they'll be close to, but they'll be close to them for 20 years, and that will be their core. This person here will have a huge amount of friends, masses of people to invite to a party, and will literally feel like every one of them is their brother and sister. It's that real connection with everybody. This person must really work on saying no to people, because that's compulsive for them. They find that really challenging. And then this person here would have to work on staying emotionally connected, because what their challenge would be is not to switch off when things get too emotional. They tend to just resort to go into my own world, and then that would be it. A couple more variations of the heart line here. This is quite common, very common in fact. So this is like a floating section. Can you see there's like a floating little adjunct to the heart line here? And then the other hand here, we've got a dipping curve at the end. So it's just the ending. Rather than curving up, it ends up curving down. Can we all see that? Great. So with the floating section, it kind of does what you would imagine it to do. The floating part of the heart line is how the person expresses and shows themselves when they meet people. So this person is going to have a very emotional and outward-going, expressive, sort of like a persona that they put on. However, when you get to know the person, they've got this much, much deeper subterranean side of their emotional self, which you wouldn't understand or get to know just from first impression. That would take a lot longer to get to know, and that would be something that a partner would see and find out. The curves, when it's curving down, this shows somebody who finds it much more difficult to express their emotions. It's kind of the opposite of it. So the emotions stay much, much more hidden. But it's not just hidden from other people, it's actually hidden from themselves. They can find it really hard to get in touch and know exactly what it is they're feeling. So they're much more emotionally detached. They're less able to emotionally express, of course. And the emotional processing takes a lot longer. It's also quite interestingly found more commonly on people who are either homosexual or gay. And there's not obviously a black and white rule for it. And what it will do is, if it's found on a woman's hand, it will certainly add strong tomboy type qualities. So it doesn't have to be quite as extreme as being gay or something like this, but it will definitely show an ability to be in touch with the opposite gender's attributes. And of course, if it's on a man's hand, they're going to have a feminine side, and that's basically what it would show. Okay, we've got a couple more heart lines here, but I might whiz through them. No, quite interesting. So this hand is heart line dominant. So what we can see, you know, I was talking about the balance of the lines. The heart line here is definitely stronger over the lifeline and the headline, and also the fate line as well. So this person's going to make all of their decisions based on their heart, based on their emotions. So all of their choices in life are going to be, what are their feelings drawing them to? So you meet some really funny people like this. I remember one client who was really excited when she came to see me, and she had bought a new car. And I said, oh great, you know, what's the mileage? She said, I don't know, but the car's purple. I said, okay, cool, but it's got a full service history. She said, I don't know, but it's purple. So it's this kind of emotional impulsivity that the person's going to have. And of course, I was looking to, you know, discuss that and elaborate upon it and balance it and things. This person's heart line curves right towards the middle finger. So this is a very, very sharp emotional expression. But do remember what the middle finger's about. Middle finger's about stability, structure, rules, and everything that's kind of to do with hierarchies and stable. So when the emotion line curves towards the middle finger, people are very emotionally geared to anything that brings them stability. So if this is on a man's hand, you very often see them being very pushy very early on in career. They want to have a stable house very quickly. They want to have a big car and things like this. And if it's a lady's hand, equally, you could very often see that. And also very often, she really appreciates that in a partner. So they would very much want the partner to be stable, to be grounded, to be somebody who they could really rely on. Who would be, you know, able to, you know, fix the car if it broke down, but then also takes care of the mortgage and basically brings some stability. Okay, yeah, so another celebrity here. We like throwing these in. Can we see the emotion line on this hand? Again, it's slightly bright, but it's marked as number 2. So this is a very curved emotion line. It's curving right to the top. I think I mark it in. So it's curving all the way up. Now, this is also a water hand. It's a delicate hand, yeah? The hand is narrow, the fingers are long. The fingers are long, the hand is narrow. The person's going to be very emotionally astute. They're going to care about people. They're going to be very humanitarian. They're going to care about art. This is for a business person. It's just not in their nature. The curved emotion line is going to be all about being heartfelt, being expressive. Princess Diana's handprint. She's also got a long index finger, which is about responsibility, taking control of situations, and having a strong sense of pride and authority and management as well. Okay, last of the major lines. The fate line shows your target, your direction, where you're going in life, how well you know who you are, what your goals are, what your first targets are, and how well you define yourself, say, through what you do, your views, and things like this. The fate line is the most variable line. It can be very hard to spot. People will come up to me and they'll go, well, I haven't got a fate line. And it's like, no, it's just coming from here, or it's just coming from there, or wherever. So we've got a very strong fate line here. And then we've got a poorer quality, weaker fate line on the right-hand side of the hand here. So these people are going to have very, very different feelings towards their direction and their purpose. Someone with a strong fate line has got very strong convictions, know what they're doing, and they feel like they're on their path. So anybody with a strong fate line has always, well, they're never far from having the sense of, yes, I'm doing the right thing. Conversely, somebody without a fate line finds it very, very hard to find reassurance in what to do. They could be doing something that is absolutely perfect for them, but they still don't quite feel it's just right because the fate line hasn't developed yet. Depending on where the fate line commences, it relates to the drive in which someone's career is pursued. So when the fate line, as we can see on this hat here on the left, is actually tied to the lifeline, can you see it's connected? The two aren't separate. And I'll show you on this one here. On the other hand, the two are very, very different. Can we see where the fate line's coming from here? I'll put that up again. So what happens is that when the fate line is tied to the lifeline, somebody is much more governed in their sense of career and work by an obligation, by a duty or a pressure, very often to do with the family or very often to do with society. So it's like somebody hasn't quite got that liberation and freedom quite yet within their work. They'll very often just be working because they either feel they ought to, or it's because they feel like they need to be making money or something like this. When the fate line is coming from the subconscious area of the hand, which is the outermost section at the bottom, it means that quite literally somebody's subconscious is driving their direction. They're going to have to be doing something that they feel is very personal, very unique, and something that they feel their heart is really, really involved in. One with a subconscious fate line doesn't really work for money. They work because they love it. And it's very important that they pursue this endeavour. And of course, they pretty much always do, because that's where the line's coming from. The development of the fate line. So the fate line can really change and develop. This is a slide I showed at the beginning. And it's just a shame we can't quite see it. But you can see it quite clearly. This guy is probably about 2 or 3 years apart. So when I first saw him, he didn't know what he wanted to do. He had like 2 or 3 business ideas. He was kind of going in between each of them. And then he committed, and then he worked on it, and then he kept on going. And then 3 years later, when I took his handprint again, we've got a really strong, solid fate line there, right up. And he's massively determined. He knows exactly what he wants. He's incredibly focused. He's got a real good career trajectory. And it just shows that the line's developed as his attitude and as his work has changed. So it's kind of like you've got to work it a bit with these lines. If there is a weakness, it can always be developed. Okay, we're coming to the end. I'll touch on some minor lines. We'll look at a couple of case studies, and then we'll do a few questions. So we've done the major lines, but on top of that, there's just loads and loads of other little additional markings that you can look at and see. So I'm just highlighting a few of them here. These are just some of the names. You've got lines that come over in the subconscious area, which is where my finger is here. You've got lines that come over here, which reflect attitudes more towards relationships and things. You've got lines at the top of the hand, which relate more to creativity, kind of otherworldly ideas, and fantasy, and other lines that will come here, and all these different areas of the hand. The hand you can divide up into quadrants and base these things all on the areas in which you will come. You've also got Palmar prints that arise as well. So these are like dermatoglyphic fingerprint patterns that arise in the palm. So these I'll be looking for as well, and these are fixed. So these are quite deep traits. People with significant Palmar prints, these really shape someone's personality, of course. So that's a big whirl we can see right in the subconscious section here. Make somebody absolutely fascinated with their subconscious, with like psychoanalysis and Freud and Jung and that sort of stuff. They can be really, really introverted and incredibly perceptive with anything to do with the psyche. So those are just some of the names that we've got there. Little bit of timing on the hand. I'll skip this one. So yeah, let's look at some case studies. So we've layered everything up. I'll give you some examples of how everything can be put together. And then, well, I'll take some questions, certainly. I won't have time to look at everybody's hand, I'm afraid. So afterwards, or during, I think, if we've got questions, it's nice to ask them here so I can sort of answer it as a group is probably best. Okay, yeah, so this handprint is somebody who had an incredibly addictive personality, quite severely addicted to all sorts of things. So, from a hand analysis perspective, we can see why. He was a poet, he's a performer. He's got low self-esteem because his index finger is very small. The index finger proportionate to the third finger, which is how you measure it, is small. Doesn't mean that everybody's got low self-esteem, but they have a propensity to it. So if things are going a bit wobbly, that's going to be the default. So he's got slightly lower esteem, lower self-worth with the smaller index finger. What we see is on his headline, he's actually got this Michael Jackson-esque, can you see he's got this other headline? So this is like the other personality that he likes to get into, which is separate from his normal sort of regular self. So when people have this and they haven't got a constant continual outlet for it, they can be more prone to seeking ways in which to get into that mindset in different ways. The other thing that he's got is this sort of like a mirage line, which completely acts as the same thing. It's like a higher emotional state that somebody wants to get into, wants to elevate them into. It gives them a fantastic imagination, but it can really detach them from this world. So if they get into drugs and things, they just completely stay aloof. He was a sex addict as well. And what we can see is he's got quite a fiery hand, so a huge amount of passion, but the emotion line is quite short. So therefore, this isn't going to be a really passionate, kind of caring, Casanova Italian sort of type romantic guy. It's going to be somebody who's actually quite blunt, quite self-satisfactory, and is going to be limited in the amount of connections he's making. So it's going to be more for sort of physical sensations. It's not anyone famous. Yeah, it's an interesting combination here, because this person comes across as being incredibly extroverted, very open, very bubbly. Look at the way the hands are spread. This is somebody who's very, very extroverted and expressive. However, when the emotion line, it's got the same short quality. It's very, very short. It kind of stops here, and then you've got the headline that comes along here. So you've got this floating part of the emotion line, which is going to be like the persona, and then this section here. So when I got to speaking to this person, it's now that they'd never actually had a relationship, and they found it very, very hard to form a bond with somebody that was anything but superficial. So I'm obviously discussing that and ways in which it can be improved. Also got digestive issues, which we can see with this line cutting into this area of the lifeline, which very often relates to the gastric region. Oh, I like this hand. I think this hand's absolutely fascinating. So have I got any stuff with it? Right. So this is a chap I met in India, and got his handprint. I think he was German, and he's got two simian lines, which is these really, really stark, obvious lines that go right across both hands. It's him an incredible amount of power, ruthlessness, determination, passion. Of course, he's got these earth hands, so he's going to have a huge amount of energy and physical presence anyway. He's got grainy skin, so he's going to need all of this stimulation, and he was just on a completely self-destructive path, is what he was telling me. Of course, a simian line does absolutely nothing in half measures. If a simian line does anything, they absolutely have to be the best at it. They're incredibly competitive. So, of course, when he was doing all of his, partying, he had to be the absolute best at it, and absolutely no half measures. His life kind of turned around. He realised that was unsustainable. And as so often happens with lines, they're drawn to something that gives them a sense of peace and stillness. So he got into meditation. But being a simian line, he doesn't just go to his local class, does he? He moves to Varanasi in India, like the kind of hub. He starts to live with the sadhus there, who are like the holy men. He learns to speak Hindi. Then he learns to speak Sanskrit to get a better understanding of it. And for 4 years, he lives with these monks, meditating, living their complete lifestyle on the edge of the Ganges. And that's a few years after where I found him. So it's a really, really good example of how something can be translated to something very, very positive when it's used correctly. He's now a very successful yoga teacher. He teaches lots and lots of people, and he's got a fantastic practice, and he's got all of these things going for him, and everything's in order. But it's not about what you have, it's about how you use it, and that's really a key takeaway from this. This is an example of an ungrounded hand, let's call it. So what we can see is a lack of lifeline. When someone hasn't got a lifeline, they've got a watery hand type like this, they've got a strong emotion line, they're going to really not have an anchor. They're not going to have something that kind of holds them in this reality. This person's going to find it harder to maintain something in a routinely kind of way, and they're going to be very, very drawn to anything that's a little bit esoteric, a bit spiritual, obviously things that are artistic. However, what's really important is that they don't just continually put all their energy into this, because they must work on the body. The person like this will long term have much more kind of energy level problems, stuff going wrong with digestion, sleep patterns not going to be great. So very, very important to work on being grounded. Financial sales. So here we have an earthy hand. What we can see is the earth hand is going to give them a huge amount of determination. An earth hand can have endurance over any other hand type. So this person, oh man, I think he works like an 85-hour week or something. It's just absolutely insane. And he gets up at, I think it's either 4 or, well, it's either 4:30 or 5 in the morning to go to the gym before he has to be in work at 7, before then he comes home from work at 10. And then, you know, it's like that 6 days a week. And he very often works Sundays as well. So only an earth hand could really endure that. But it's a very technical job. And what we can see is his headline has absolutely got the bandwidth to kind of process technical information. It's a very long, it's a very clear, straight headline. So he's got fantastic processing power. Oh, the other interesting thing that you can see is that fate and the lifeline are tied. Can we see this? So what that means, if we remember, is that, or actually it's a more interesting pattern. What actually happening here is that the fate line is substituting for the lifeline. So really the lifeline stops there, and then the fate line is kind of acting or imposing as the lifeline. Very literally, someone's job becomes their life. Someone's sense of stability, their security is coming from their work. So this is a really important thing for them to understand and slowly sort of disentangle, because otherwise it's very, very compulsive. Right, fascinating hand. 60-year-old gardener, this person was, and I took his hand and look at the lines that come out. Basically 3 lines on the hand. So this person hasn't got that subtle sensitivity. When people have got an awful lot of lines on the hand, it means that they're very, very complex. It means that they can read very complex details in other people. This person wouldn't be able to do that. They actually had learning difficulties, as you can tell from the hand, but they couldn't read and write, and their communication was quite basic. I mean, they were functioning fine, but you know, if they were to try and subtly understand why somebody might be upset at a dinner table, they just wouldn't have that understanding. They literally don't live in that world. This hand purely lives in a very physical, kind of crude world, and they just don't have that level of sophistication that you'll see from hands with an awful lot of lines. So this hand is the same kind of physical hand, but actually does have a lot of lines. So this person was a builder, getting involved with all the kind of earthy qualities, but then he went and trained as a psychotherapist, which is evident by all of the lines and all of their little subtle sensitivities. He's got a very well developed subconscious area, so he's going to be very interested in the subconscious, and he's got a lot of lines in the subconscious, which means that he's got a lot of energy that's going there. He's got a lot of thought that's going into this area. If we look at the previous hand, there's absolutely nothing going on in the subconscious. This person's not going to be aware of those things. It's going to be a completely different world to them, and the headline's obviously very short, so they're not going to be thinking about anything very complex. Whereas this hand is much, much more refined. Yes, this is interesting because you've got a few different levels to look at here. Firstly is postural. You look at the way the hand's holding itself. That thumb is tense. That little finger's at an unnatural position. There's tension just in the way the hand is laying it down. People don't lay their hand down like that. It's not a relaxed way in which they do it. The person was suffering from tension, anxiety, and stress. We look at the hand shape. It's a water hand. They are a little bit more prone to those things. They're very sensitive to environment. They're very emotionally astute. So therefore, if things are getting stressful externally, it's going to affect the water hand more. Dominant index finger, going to be very judgmental of themselves, put huge amounts of pressure on themselves. So that's going to add extra stress. That's the position I'm alluding to there. And really interesting pattern going on the bottom. So I'm not quite sure how you can see it, but you've got an extra line that's coming this way, a missing gap there, and a little line that's coming here. So missing bottom of the lifeline means they're not going to feel grounded, they're not going to feel stable, their life pattern's going to be a little bit off, and physically they're going to be a little bit weak. A line cutting across like this can very often relate to allergies or sensitivities. And then with this extra line coming across here, we've definitely got some sense of digestive issues and an imbalance in the hand. Now, if you add these things together, when somebody's got these kind of digestive issues, they're very controlling and very image conscious. Very often you get somebody with eating disorders, which is what this person had. So it's not common to get these kind of patterns, people with, you know, like symptoms of anorexia or something something like that. Obviously, you know, this person didn't have it quite that severe, but okay, just finally, looking at relationships in the hand. Now, very often people's hands match up very, very tightly. These hands are very, very similar, and this is a married couple. So they've got similar shaped hands, similar long little finger, so they're going to have a very, very good sense of communication. Both of these two people have worked in journalism and writing. Both have got dipping heads, so they're going to perceive things in their same way. They're both going to film and be able to talk about it on the same level. It's very... They're going to see eye to eye on so many different ways and have an interpretation of a lot of events. Again, matching hands. I'm going to whiz through these here because I think that's kind of self-evident that they're similar. And the other thing with partners, you very often get asymmetrical pairings. Relationships and hands are so interesting, and you get all sorts of types of relationships. There's no gold standard. And an asymmetrical pairing can work really, really well. So what we've got here is a more sensitive water hand on the right-hand side and a more stable, earthy type hand, but these fingers are quite long, so it's really an air hand. And what these hands are going to do is they're going to complement each other. The water hand is going to get an awful lot of stability and grounding from this hand, but then the air hand is going to get an awful lot of conversation and communication, which it really, really wants, an interesting discussion from the water hand. So these are how hands will complement. Okay, so conclusions. We've looked at the science, different areas and the way in which this has been built up. We've looked at hand shape, skin texture, finger lengths, very important, as are the prints, the major lines and the minor lines. And we've done some case studies as well. So we've done an awful lot, really. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. So yeah, I've been doing this for 10 years. My private practice is in Bristol. I see a lot of people on Skype or by WhatsApp or by phones. I've got instructions on my website which I send out for taking prints, which I can send to people, a little kit, or for taking photos. So that's how my private practice works. I also work at a lot of events, at festivals and weddings or corporate functions and things like this. So all the details for how to have a booking or have a private reading are all on my website. And speaking to Paul about his platform and things, I'll definitely be putting some promotional offers on there. So if people wanted to book me or have a private reading or hire me for an event or something like this, do go through the website. Right, any questions? Right, okay. Yeah, so we've got inner and outer world differences. So if you're right-handed and the index finger's longer, say, that's how people are going to see you in it shorter. So that's how people are going to see you in the external world and everything that this finger relates to. And then internally, this is what's going to be going on more within you. So people are going to know you better on first impression by that side of your character than the other side. But yeah, the fingers are strange things. They can really often be quite different. It would relate quite strongly to relationships as well. The index finger is quite apparent and can be quite dominant if it's long within a relationship. So that would be something that your partner or close family would definitely experience and see that side of you. It's the side of you that could be much more organising, more on it, and more dominant within certain domains. Yeah. Yeah, so the lines start to form within the first trimester. So they form very, very early, but then they continually develop. So they're not in, there are different debates as to how the lines are entirely formed. Some of the lines are definitely genetically inherited to a certain degree. So a simian line, it's much more common to have a simian if your parents have it. But then other lines, as we can see, all change. Yeah. Yeah, I generally say a year. Yeah, a year is a good amount of time. What would also happen as well is that if somebody comes for a reading, they very often want to discuss careers, or they very often want to discuss relationships. So we'll probably spend the majority of the reading analysing that and going into detail. Maybe in 6 months' time or a year's time, they've had a change of job, and so they want to come back and they want to discuss this. Yeah, if things are quite apparent, yeah. Major lines take longer to change. Minor lines can change really quite dramatically. Yeah, yeah. And certainly things like postural changes and stuff. Someone can come along and hold their hands like this, and then they come along and hold them like this, and yeah, there's lots and lots of variations. Yeah.
How did injury to the palm
Yeah. What type of bike? No, I'm joking. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Do you know that it will heal with a lot more lines? Is that right? Well, the dermatoglyphics, which is the actual, the skin ridges, they will always come back to how they are. I haven't actually got experience of sort of pre and post. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, it'd be really, I mean, it was something that I don't know about, so I wouldn't be able to answer, but it'd be very interesting to look at, certainly to look at the development of it over the recovery period. I mean, was it on both hands that you noticed? And they were starkly very liney there. But did you know if they were liney before? Well, that would be the thing, wouldn't it? They weren't liney before. And then even after the full healing period, they were sort of liney. So it could just be stress, because stuff around this thumb ball area can really relate to bodily or family stresses as well. So, yeah. Yeah.
When I said I was coming here, she said, I have a lead from a pencil stuck in my hand.
Right, yeah.
When I was a kid, how is that going to affect me? I wanted to.
I probably wouldn't look too much into that, I guess. What can happen is that sometimes people can have a very synchronistic accident that can really, really be quite symbolic. But I would tend to let the person make their own inferences onto that. If somebody trapped their finger in the door, I wouldn't run off and be like, oh my goodness, that happened on your little finger. It's all to do with communication or something like this, But if somebody happened to kind of within their own mind have like a light bulb moment and realize that during that period they were actually having an argument about communication and then slammed the door, then maybe I might point something in that direction. But generally I would say not. Yeah.